The next morning, Eirik stood by the chapel window, watching as dawn spilled like molten gold across the rugged landscape. The monastery, with its weathered stones and quiet sanctity, seemed less a prison now and more a strange kind of home. Yet beneath the calm surface, a tempest stirred, inside and beyond. News had come from the village below. Bandits were gathering, seeking to claim the monastery's riches, angry at the sudden absence of Viking plunder. The threat was real, and the monks prepared in whispered urgency, their prayers now laced with fear. Eirik's hands clenched into fists. He had refused violence once, but now the monastery he had sworn to protect faced the wrath of men wielding swords and fire. Father Anund approached, calm as ever. "The choice before you is clear." Eirik met his eyes, the weight of responsibility settling like armor. To fight is to betray my vow. To stand silent is to condemn these walls. Anund's gaze was steady. Sometimes, to protect peace, one must face the storm. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars and portent, Eirik took up his axe once more. Not for conquest, but defense. His heart hammered a fierce rhythm, not of glory, but of desperate resolve. The long shadow of the past stretched before him, but this time he stepped into it with open eyes and a quiet strength born from the silence he had chosen. The monastery slept uneasy, its walls trembling beneath the weight of coming fire, and a warrior's vow yet untested. The night shattered into chaos as the bandits surged against the monastery walls, shouts raw and wild, torches throwing jagged light across the cold stone. Eirik stood at the forefront, axe in hand, a sentinel between violence and sanctity. The clash was brutal, steel ringing against steel, flesh against flesh. But Eirik fought with a strange clarity, not for gold or glory, but to guard the fragile hope that had taken root within these walls. A young monk, trembling and pale, reached out to steady him. "Do not lose yourself," he whispered. Eirik's breath was ragged, eyes sharp. "I fight to find myself." Blood and sweat mingled beneath the moonlight as the bandits faltered, their fury met with a warrior transformed, not by lust for plunder, but by a newfound purpose. When the dawn bled pale over battered stones and broken branches, silence returned, thick, uneasy, but unbroken. Eirik stood amidst the ruin, chest heaving, wounds stinging but spirit unyielding. The monastery remained, a beacon carved from sacrifice and courage. And in that quiet victory, he glimpsed the beginning of a path he had never dared imagine, a way to wield the axe not as harbinger of death, but as guardian of life. In the fragile light of morning, the monastery bore the scars of the night's fury, cracked stones, smoldering timber, and the heavy silence of loss. But amidst the ruin, a new presence pulsed, steady and resolute, like the beating heart beneath cracked armor. Eirik walked the battered halls, his steps measured and reverent. The monks tended wounds with gentle hands, their faces drawn but unbroken. Father Anund met him in the chapel, eyes full of quiet approval. "You chose differently," the old man said softly. "Not a warrior of conquest, but of conviction." Eirik nodded, the weight of his journey settling deep within. "I feared losing myself in violence, but I found something stronger in defense, in choosing when to draw the blade." The monk smiled, shadows playing across his lined face. "The gods favor those who fight not for glory, but for what must be protected." Outside, the wind stirred the prayer flags, carrying with it the scent of pine and fresh rain. The monastery stood firm, a sanctuary not just of stone and faith, but of choices made in the quiet spaces between war and peace. Eirik's gaze lifted to the horizon, where the sun climbed slow and sure, a promise carved in light. "I am no longer the man I was," he said quietly, "and that is enough." Father Anund placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes the greatest battles are those within. And sometimes, the greatest victories are in the silence that follows. The seasons turned slowly, the monastery's quiet life weaving around Eirik like a second skin. He no longer bore the restless hunger of a warrior bent on plunder, but carried a new purpose. A guardian of fragile peace, a keeper of the silent vows forged in fire and blood. One evening, beneath a sky streaked with dying light, Eirik stood at the cliff's edge, looking out over the restless sea. The waves crashed and receded, relentless and patient, like the fate he had once feared. Behind him, the monastery's bells tolled softly, calling the faithful to evening prayer. In that sound, in the wind and stone and salt, Eirik heard the echo of a life reclaimed. A figure approached silently, Father Anund, aged yet steady, carrying a simple wooden cross carved with ancient runes. "You have chosen well," the monk said, voice like a steady flame in the dusk. "Not all find their fate in bloodshed. Some meet it in mercy." Eirik nodded, the weight of the past finally lightened by the slow grace of acceptance. "I was ready to lose myself to war," he said softly. "But here I found something I didn't know I sought, redemption." The wind stirred again, carrying the scent of pine and distant storms, the eternal song of sea and sky. And as night fell gently over the monastery, Eirik felt, at last, the quiet peace of a warrior who had met his destiny, not in the clash of axes, but in the stillness of choice.
I never thought I would find myself in a situation where my main life priority would be the question, can you eat lichen? But I'll start from the beginning. It was all Lenya's idea. Long story short, Lenya, my friend from uni, a man who once invested all his savings in a reliable startup selling biodegradable yo-yos, once called me at 6:43 a.m. on a Saturday. That is, the very fact of the call was disgusting. But he wasn't just calling, he was excited. "Dude, I have a brilliant idea," said a voice that could only belong to a person who is either delighted or psychotic. As it turned out, let's go on a hike. A real one. With a tent, sleeping bags, shaking spiders out of your underwear. No internet, no people, no nothing. In the forest. Wildness. Silence. Just us and nature. "And the toilet?" I asked. "Nature." He answered with enthusiasm. I should have understood immediately that this was a trap. But my logic for some reason said, "It's Lenya, what could go wrong?" It's like saying, "It's a volcano, so what's smoking? Maybe it's just fog?" He had already organized everything, a rented Jeep, a route map. It turned out to be printed from some forum from 2008, which looks like it was written by shamans, and a supply of dry food, enough for 2 village weddings, including a bag of something he called meat. I'm still not sure from whom. We set off for the state of Clarestone, a little-known place with mountains, forests, fog, and a complete lack of Wi-Fi. And, as it turned out, with one very angry forester, about whom a little later. The route began in a tiny parking lot near a gas station, where there was a "Don't climb without experience" sign, on which someone had added in pen, "Even if you have experience, don't climb anyway." But we were good guys, with backpacks, sweatpants, and the self-confidence of 2 people who had watched 2 seasons of Man vs. Wild, and thought they now understood how to survive in the jungle. For the first 3 hours, everything was perfect. Lenya walked ahead, waving a stick like a fantasy hero, and periodically exclaiming, "Look at the nature." We found a stream, over which we drank water like beavers, without any filters, because I read that if the spring is flowing, it's clean. And then we peed in the bushes with a feeling of complete unity with nature. And then we took the wrong turn. After we turned left near the fallen oak, which, as it turned out later, was a pine tree, the trail began to disappear. At first, little by little, as if someone humorously erased it with an eraser. And then it disappeared altogether, like a salary on the 31st. Don't worry, I'm guided by the moss, Lenya said proudly, pointing to a stone covered in green. The moss grows on the north side. And where are we going? I asked. To the south, he announced happily. We went south, guided by the moss, the compass from AliExpress, which constantly pointed to his left pocket, because there was a power bank there, and the Hike Me Now application, which, it seems, was last updated before the war. At lunch, we decided to take a break. Lenya took out his famous homemade stew, which he had been canning since he was sure the world would end in 2012. It tasted like memories of food. I said I wasn't hungry. Lenya ate my portion too. After a short rest, we realized that we no longer knew where we were. Absolutely. Not even approximately. It was impossible to turn back, because all the trees are the same. It was scary to go forward, because there were already thickets of nettles above the waist. And Lenya, in his trekking shorts, already looked like a member of the Red Thighs of Salvation sect. And then, just like in a movie, it started to rain. It wasn't just rain, it was a damned apocalypse. Thunder, lightning, water pouring from the sky, like from a dormitory shower, cold, fierce, and with the smell of rust. We tried to hide under a tree, but for some reason every tree turned out to be occupied by squirrels, birds, or, in one case, a very hostile owl. Wet, hungry, and with a map soaked to the point of mush, Lenya carried it in the outside pocket of his backpack because it was convenient. We decided to set up camp. The camp consisted of a tent for two, which Lenya had bought at a discount. It turned out to be for one person. That is, for one very thin person. No more than 160 centimeters tall. And without a backpack. We lay in a pile, Lenya on the bottom, me on top. It was warm, uncomfortable, and eerily like a scene from a movie you don't want to see a second time. And then night fell. And the night brought surprises. Night in the forest is not just dark. It is such a level of darkness that even my own thoughts seem obscured. It is so dark that when I raised my hand to my face, I couldn't see it. Although, as it turned out, it was under Lenya. That is, I was not just lying on it, but with my hand under it. The only thing scarier is in a reserved seat car when there is no paper in the toilet. The sounds of the night are a separate topic. If you think these are nightingales and divine silence, you have never spent the night near a rotting stump. There is a whole choir of sounds there. Frogs, like old creaking doors, some creatures rummaging through fallen leaves, and someone who was clearly walking in circles around our tent. Did you hear that? I whispered. Heard, Lenya whispers. Maybe it's a raccoon? It's heavy, fat, snorting and rustling. It's not a raccoon. It's either a bear or a very large squirrel. At that point, we knew about survival as much as we did about quantum physics. We'd heard about it somewhere, but we weren't sure how it worked. Lenya pulled a flask of homemade rum, actually a mixture of tea and a little moonshine, from his backpack and whispered, "If it eats us, I want to be drunk." We decided not to leave the tent. We decided to lie very still, and pretend to be something inanimate, like old moss. At some point, something slammed against the tent wall. We both stopped breathing. Then again. Once more. Then silence. And then a tug. Someone or something was pulling Lenya's backpack, which he had, of course, left outside. And with him, all the food supplies, the first aid kit, the flashlight, and his spare underwear. I cried. Quietly. Inside myself. Psychologically. The next morning when we left the tent, we saw the backpack torn to pieces. The food completely eaten. The flask empty. Someone, apparently, also decided to try the rum. And most importantly, paw prints. Huge. Like a dog's. But drunk. We were left with nothing. Only with my backpack, which contained 2 packs of napkins, a flask of coffee, the book, How to Survive in the Wild, which for some reason was in English, and a bag of peanuts from the plane. And then Lenya uttered the classic, "Well, it's okay, we're strong. We have experience." I looked at him. Lenya stood there in only shorts, with eyes like owls and traces of saliva on his cheeks. From experience. And then he said, "Let's move on. We're definitely not far from the exit." And we left. When you've been eating nothing but coffee, old peanuts, and your own hope for several days, your brain starts looking for entertainment. On the 4th day of the hike, around lunchtime, Lenya seriously asked me, "Do you see this?" and pointed to a stone. The stone, he said, was an exact copy of Bob Dylan's face. I just saw a stone. And then, I admit, the stone did sing something bluesy. Or maybe I wasn't really myself anymore. We walked by Lenya's eye, which seemed to be guided by the smell of wood. A real forest jeepus. A couple of hours later, we came to something that looked like a trail. Straight, trodden, with traces of footprints. Lenya confidently said, "This is our ticket home," and we followed it, like 2 heroes of a cheap survival movie. But there is a nuance. The path led to nowhere. It ended abruptly with a cliff. And not just a cliff, but a straight wall of rock 30 meters high. And a barely noticeable wooden ladder that led down. A ladder that looked as if it had been built by gnomes in 1974 from improvised branches and someone else's faith in the best. We stood and were silent. For the first time in the entire journey. Lenya carefully stepped on the first rung. It crunched so much that my stomach clenched. But there was nothing left to lose, well, except for life, of course. We went down. Slowly. Praying. To God. Lenya. To Susanne. A surprise awaited us below, an old logging camp. Abandoned. With rusty metal barrels, a peeling trailer, and a sign that said, "Billy's ghost lives here. Don't come in." It was a great moment to turn around and run away. But we were hungry. Inside the trailer we found a can of peaches in syrup, made in 1993. An old gas stove, which didn't work, but worked well as a stool. And a walkie-talkie. Yes, a good old Soviet walkie-talkie. Which worked. Partially. Lenya pressed the button. "Hello. There's 2 of us. Here's Billy's ghost. Come in." The pause. Then in response, "What the hell? Who are you? What fucking forest are you in?" We almost burst into tears. It was a real voice. Human. Someone heard us. We tried to explain where we were. There's a rock. There's a ladder. There's an inscription. The voice on the radio side. "Did you get swept into Buxton Forest or something? Do you know how far it is to the nearest road? 5 miles. Through the thicket. Idiots. Sit there. I'll pass it on to the rescuers." We sat. Quietly. With peaches. And with Lenya, who said, "I told you my moss works."